back to Reinventing Mental Health, where we're moving beyond treatment management or symptom management to root causes and functional options. Today, I am so excited to welcome Dell Bigtree. He is a trailblazing health advocate. He is the CEO of Informed Consent Action Network, an Emmy Award-winning producer, and the host of The Highwire.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us
Thanks
today.
for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Dell's most recent documentary, An Inconvenient Study, brought forward a really important question for all of us in the United States today. And that question was, what is the factor driving this chronic disease epidemic?
Yeah, it's a very important issue, and we have the sickest generation of kids we've ever seen in America, and that makes us the sickest nation in the industrialized world. So nobody gets to jump up and down right now and celebrate how awesome our medicine is, or how awesome our sciences are, or how great our food supply is, or how clean our sanitation is. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. And so we got to get to the bottom of it quick.
Absolutely. So I've been in the mental health space as a practitioner for the last 12 years, and my population that I prefer to work with is kids 3 to 12.
Okay.
I've always loved working with that population. They're really energetic, they're fun, and they listen and they respond. And they also don't lie during the appointments, you know?
Yeah. Call it like they see it.
Yes. But we have definitely seen a trend, especially what seems like over the last 5 years, where we're getting kids younger and younger that have things like anxiety and autism and even depression. In my personal opinion, there's no reason for a 3-year-old to feel anxious or depressed. So what did your study show in these particular areas?
Well, I mean, the study looked specifically at vaccines, right? This was a comparative study looking at children who were vaccinated and children who had received no vaccines, and compared their health outcomes. At the heart of this is the work that I've been doing with my nonprofit Informed Consent Action Network. I don't think vaccines are the only problem, but I think they are being overlooked, in fact avoided as being put on the table when we're questioning what is this giant health crisis that we're in. You know, we see alarming rates of rises in drugs for autoimmune disease, drugs for attention deficit disorder, drugs for depression, especially in girls. All these things are skyrocketing. You know, I think elementary school kids, I think 1 in 4 is leaving elementary school on a drug they're going to be on the rest of their lives. By the time I think they're 20 years old, they've now entered the place where more than 50% of Americans are on drugs. Something's wrong. We use more drugs than anyone else in the world. So all of these things. And I think there's a lot of factors that are playing it, not just vaccination, but certainly I think we've got to look at, are we creating an imbalance from the very beginning? So I think when you look at depression in young kids, anxiety, I mean, is that vaccinations? It could be. It's certainly a lot of things. I think all of the screens our kids are on, when you see babies, staring at, iPads and things like that from the moment they're born. I think we're creating separation. We're not having really interpersonal human connections. But what the study looked at, and this is a question that I've been asking since I put out a documentary back in 2016 called Vaxxed. I was touring the country with it, and we were on tour, sold out audiences all across America, 5 shows a day for an entire year. But I was going to be going through Detroit, Michigan, and somebody reached out to me and said, I know the head of infectious disease at Henry Ford Health. Would you be interested in meeting them? Now, Vaxxed, that film, was the film that changed my career forever. I left CBS on the daytime talk show The Doctors, so I was a medical producer, to make that documentary about a whistleblower inside the CDC that had committed scientific fraud, said that we manipulated or committed fraud on a study that was supposed to look at the MMR vaccine and autism. And in the middle of the study, they kicked half the kids off the study because the results of the study were showing that there was a connection between MMR and autism. And so they manipulated the science to get the result that they wanted. That's what that film was about. So, I was thinking, well, I'm going to speak to the head of infectious disease at Henry Ford Health. Henry Ford is one of our preeminent, research centers in medicine and science, not just in America, but around the world. They're spectacular in the work that they do. So I sat down at dinner with him, and he sort of surprised me. He started out by, first he watched the film, which is great. Lots of doctors and nurses were avoiding the movie, because we were being called baby killers, and how could you question vaccinations? But he sat down and said, I've seen your film, and it's like, it's compelling. He said, but there's something you've been saying as you're touring the country that I found very upsetting. You keep saying these YouTube videos where you're speaking that they've never done the proper science to establish that vaccines are safe. And he said, so I took issue with that statement, and I sit on the biggest database in the world because that's how we do our research. And so I went to get the data so I could bring it to you to sort of correct you on that statement. And he said, and I'm shocked that I have to sit across from you and tell you you're right. He said, I mean, here I work in infectious disease. I had no idea we had never done a placebo-based randomized controlled trial establishing safety on any of the vaccines we're giving our kids in America. That's now a pretty well-known fact. There's a couple of outlying mainstream news agencies that keep saying the experts say that's not true. The experts can't provide you a piece of evidence to prove it's not true. They keep making the statement. But so he said, I don't know what I could do about it. I believe in vaccines. It doesn't mean that vaccines aren't safe. It just means we can't say that they're safe. I said, yeah, but you do say they're safe. Every news channel is telling us that they're safe, and mountains of evidence have proved that they're safe, and that's just simply not true. And as a journalist, I'm just trying to get to the truth. And I said, so what we could do to get to the bottom of this is, would you ever consider doing a comparative study comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated kids? And he said, yeah, I would do that study. I was shocked because this is something that's been requested for like decades by parents of vaccine-injured children who are being gaslit, told it's all in your mind, you're crazy, the vaccine had nothing to do with it, all this stuff. And so anyway, that was 2016. Years went by. I would call and check in, how, are you doing the study yet? He finally got around to doing the study in 2020. He had finished it. It was 18,500 kids in the Henry Ford Health System, a really solid study group, because inside of Henry Ford, they're the insurer, they're also the hospital, they're the medical practitioners, and even if a child left, say they were traveling and went to a different hospital for some issue, because Henry Ford was also the insurer, they would get that data. So they had these kids' data, from birth, and 2,000 of them were unvaccinated. And so the results of that study were, the conclusion was you were 2.5 times more likely to have a chronic disease if you were vaccinated compared to those that weren't vaccinated. Neurodevelopmental disorders, which is probably going to affect mental cognition, but also depression, things like that. They'll be in that space. 6 times the rate of neurodevelopmental disorders amongst the vaccinated compared to the unvaccinated. And then in the autoimmune disease category, it's about 6 times the rate of autoimmune disease in the vaccinated compared to the unvaccinated. Those numbers are so staggering. It's really beyond comprehension. A big difference would be like a 60%, rate difference between vaccinated and unvaccinated. This is like 500%, as high as 600% increased risks of having autoimmune or neurological disorders. Really scary stuff. But he refused to publish the study. I didn't really know about that. In 2020, he said, I finished it, but I'm not publishing. I said, why? He's like, I just can't. I said, what do you mean you can't? You're the head of the department. You can do whatever you want. He's like, this will be career ending if I do. I was like, why? He's like, yeah, the study's really bad. I was like, how so? He just wasn't being clear. I sort of kept pressing him for about 2 years. It was COVID at that point. What are we going to do about it? And then by 2022, I kind of had it. And I happened to be speaking in an event in Detroit, so I said, hey, let's get dinner. Come through town. We had a great relationship, but I think, as far as two people on totally different perspective on this conversation we could have, I said, sure, I'll meet you for dinner. And I brought hidden cameras and audio recording equipment to record that dinner, because I was going to ask him all the hard questions. What is scaring you about this study if you're scared? And as he said, look, this is a good study. you can see it's the heart of the movie, An Inconvenient Study, really is the setup of why this study was important. But you get to hear it from his voice, not mine. This is a guy that proclaims, even at this dinner, I am pro-vaccine. This institution is pro-vaccine. This study, and I've said, there's something wrong in the study. Is there any way you could do this study better? He's like, not that I can think of. He says, but they are going to attack it because the results are not what anyone wants to see.
And they definitely have been doing that.
Yeah, and they have been doing it. We got a cease and desist letter before the film even came out. As soon as they knew we were making a film and we put out a trailer, Henry Ford Health reached out with their lawyers and said they're threatening a case of defamation against us. And just to I'm all about transparency. Science should be transparent. They're claiming that, the film, I let the film speak for itself. I don't really claim much other than what Dr. Zervo says himself. I'll be fired if I put this job. I'll lose my career.
Yep.
But they're claiming that the film insinuates that the study was not published or didn't go through peer review because of the results, that they were afraid of the results. They are saying the only reason that study didn't go through peer review or get published is because it's a bad study, the data is not good, and the methodology didn't reach our scientific standards.
But there's been other doctors, like I saw a post this morning, somebody else said that they evaluated the study and they feel that the study is sound and that the data speaks for itself.
That's my favorite thing about this study and this film, is that all any of us can hope for right now, in a moment where so many scientists say we just don't know what's going on. Oh, we don't know why our kids are so sick. But we won't study anything that has anything to do with an industry. We won't look at sugar in our diets. We won't look at chemicals in our food. We won't look at vaccines. We won't. That's what Robert Kennedy Jr. is changing at HHS, and he's under attack by all the media that's owned by those industries. All those advertisers that are pumping those poisons into our environment, they don't like Bobby Kennedy because he's like, I'm not choosing any favorites. You're all on the chopping block. We're going to look at all of it. But what I love about this film is that I have said it's jump-started or reinvigorated the scientific method. Science only exists in the challenge, right? What we learn in science is never settled, ever. There's nothing that is, not open to a new review or maybe a new, attack even. It invites it, challenge it. That under that challenge does our science evolve. And so, as you pointed out, some world-renowned scientists and doctors are looking at this study. I was just on Dr. Drew Pinsky's show yesterday, who, he's a doctor. He prescribes drugs. He's a psychiatrist, and he said, I looked at the study, and I've looked at Henry Ford's issues, and these results, the signal is so big,
right?
It really can't be explained away by the issues that Henry Ford is bringing up. Dr. Peter Gutcha, who is a founder of Cochrane Collaboration, which is the most esteemed non-pharma-based, non-governmental science agency in the world, he's come forward, and he's been pro-vaccine for decades, and he's saying, look, I've looked at Henry Ford's complaint, and it doesn't explain away the size of this signal. This is a very, very alarming study to see that a process that we may be going through with our kids and giving our kids is doing more harm than good. It is time to reevaluate these products that are given in massive amounts of doses. We've really seen an increase in the amount of vaccines we're giving our kids. And many, many more doctors and scientists are looking at this. I had a friend that's, he works in the film industry in LA, does location scouting and consulting, and he was looking at a new mansion up in Beverly Hills for a possible movie set, and he realized it was owned by a doctor, and he said to the doctor, just out of curiosity, you aware of the Henry Ford study that's going around right now? And the doctor said, oh yeah, I've looked at it, it's very troubling. And the doctor said, and many of us in the Kaiser Permanente system, it's being handed all over through emails and stuff. And they said, though I'm pro-vaccine, I will say there are new questions now many of us are starting to ask, especially after COVID. I think that what's making this moment porous enough to have this conversation amongst medical professionals is they realized what a mistake was made, and the mistakes that were made with COVID. We were told this was a product that could stop transmission. It did not. We were told to tell people to wear masks, and now the science then, the science now, but there's never science that showed that it could stop a particle as small as a coronavirus. The social distancing that was challenged. Like, why are we locked? We're locking down because there's a belief if we keep a big enough distance, the virus will go where? What's it going? Where's it go? Right? That somehow that would protect us. Tony Fauci is now admitted in Congress. We just made that up. Even after saying in the middle of the, when he was being challenged, if you're challenging me, you were challenging science. Sort of a joke. He's like science personified. Right. And now we know that it wasn't science. And so I think under those circumstances, medical experts that care about what they're doing, they have believed in the CDC. It's almost, I think it's very much like a religion. They've bowed down to the establishment and said the establishment always tells the truth. After COVID, that can no longer, that belief system was shattered.
Oh, definitely.
Establishment
huge changes there.
Didn't tell us the truth. We were lied to, and therefore we were essentially forced to lie to our patients. And now our patients don't trust us, not because of what we've done, because of what you made us do. And so I think that's why this study is so important right now. I think it's why it's getting the attention that it's getting. And I'll say it's not the first time this study has been done. There's been somewhere between 6 and 10 different vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. All of them have been sort of attacked because they'll say, oh, that was done by anti-vaxxers, or that doctor, one of them, Dr. Paul Thomas, had a huge practice, tens of thousands of kids. I think he did a study of just under 10,000 children because he was allowing kids in his practice to not vaccinate. The parents didn't want to vaccinate, fine. He wasn't forcing it on them, but he had kids that were vaccinated, and he decided, let me look at all the kids that were born in my practice and compare those that were vaccinated to those that never got a vaccine. And he saw, in many ways, very, very similar results as Henry Ford Health. Incredible rises in autoimmune disease and neurodevelopmental disorders and things like that in his study group. But all of those studies have always been written off because they'll say, oh, well, they had a bias. Henry Ford, I would say that Dr. Zervos did this study because I challenged him. Proved me wrong. Right. Henry Ford will say that I'm not allowed to say that. I want to say they did this study to prove me wrong. They're like, you have no evidence that that's true. All right, so I don't know what the motivation was. Right. But I do know that Henry Ford celebrates that they force vaccinate everyone that works for them. And Dr. Marcus Zervos says in my dinner, I'm the reason we force vaccinate every employee here because I believe that much in vaccines. So that's the statements they've made. So when they went to do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated comparative study, I think you can say that there was a bias there, that they were expecting to see the vaccinated turn out healthier. Right. Otherwise, I doubt they would have done the study. And my personal belief, my opinion is this, that if the results were flipped, if the unvaccinated were 2.5 times more likely to have a chronic disease, if the unvaccinated were 6 times more likely to have a neurodevelopmental disorder, if the unvaccinated were 6 times more likely to have an autoimmune disease, but if the unvaccinated have all these health issues that the study shows, I believe this would have been the biggest headline in the entire world. Because to date, there has been no study that compares vaccinated to unvaccinated that showed that the vaccinated were healthier. And if they had achieved that, that would rob Robert Kennedy Jr. of any voice, really, of me, of those that have been challenging the system. That would shut us up right there. So I think there's a reason that study has never been done, which I think is shocking. Right. It's shocking that a product that we are told we give our children to make them healthier, that not one major medical institution in the entire world, not one government health agency in the entire world can do a very simple study comparing vaccinated children in their area to unvaccinated and show us, see, the vaccinated are healthier. Why can't they do that? That should be easy to do if this product is actually making kids healthier.
Well, their current argument is we can't do it because that would be unethical.
Yes, that is the argument.
Yeah.
The argument, that's really the argument behind not doing a prospective study, which is how, and part of the problem is when I say they've never done the proper safety study to establish the vaccines are safe, that is a controlled study where one group got vaccines and the other group got none, and we track them over several years of their lives and see how their health outcomes are. In the none group, let me be clear, they got a placebo, so that it's double blind, meaning the doctors doing it don't know who got what, the people being injected with either saline or the vaccine don't know which one they're getting, but they go along, and then we watch over a couple of years, because look, the issue with any sort of safety study is, number one, what are the most likely issues we're going to have? And how often do those occur? So if we're looking for, if we're dealing with a product that is manipulating your immune system, right? It's causing immunity, or it's tricking your immune system into thinking it's had a disease that it really didn't have, or only had part of the disease. Then the most likely side effect will be immune dysregulation, a mess up in the immune system that gets the internal computer going wrong, where it's not attacking the virus or the bacteria, but it's attacking our own bodies, right?
And that's not going to happen overnight.
It's not going to happen
take
overnight.
Time.
So anyone that suffers from autoimmune disease, it'll start out like, what's that? And then all of a sudden, a year later, I'm starting to get a rash on my arm. And then, next thing you know, in 5 years, I've got a plaque psoriasis all over my body, my ears are cracking and bleeding, or just horrible things that people deal with autoimmune disease, or gut issues. Starts with some stomach aches here and there. Eventually, I don't feel like I can eat anything. It takes years. Right. So if we're going to see if a product causes that, that study has to be long enough to capture that, to see that. So when you look at the vaccines, the studies they have done, the trials they did prior to licensure, none of them are longer than 6 months. Okay, so none of them are designed to be long enough to capture autoimmune disease, mutations of your genes in any way, cancers. None of those things are going to really be established in 6 months. Then you have to ask yourself, well, even if we did see it, how do we know that that wasn't just naturally what was going to happen to these kids? Right? That was just a natural part of their life. They were going to get cancer. They were going to have an autoimmune disease. Right. How do you know that the vaccine caused it? The only way you can figure causation is you have to have an identical group that didn't get it, that you're tracking at the same time, so you can say, hey, we have 5 cases of cancer in the vaccine group. How many cases of cancer do we have in the unvaccinated group, or the placebo group? Right. And then, if there's a disparity, then you go, now we have to look closer at the vaccine. But if you don't have that placebo group, which is the case in every trial they've ever done, the industry itself that's making the product is going to make $1 billion out of the product, will tell you, yes, there was cancer, but that was just a natural occurrence. Yes, babies die in the trial group, but babies die. And you're like, but how many? So we have no comparative, we have no way to establish that the vaccine had something to do with it. So those two problems, they're too short, they have no placebo group, so even if you did see an issue, you could just write it off as that was natural. And then most importantly, most of these studies are so small, have so few children in them, that if there was an issue, like let's look at if you look at an issue that's like 1 in 1,000, let's say, you really are going to need 2,000 or 3,000 kids in the study to get 2 or 3 cases, so that you can see, did those 2 or 3 cases appear in the unvaccinated or the placebo group. So look at hepatitis B vaccine that finally is now being moved into shared decision making as of just last week. An amazing development in all this by the new advisory committee on immunization practices. But the Hep B vaccine, and why it was really focused by the CDC and Robert Kennedy Jr. coming out of the gate, is it only had 147 children in one of the studies. There's 2 different products. They're about the same. But 147 children in the Recombavax trial. So 141, what are you going to, has to be like a problem like what 1 in 50? I mean, it's a huge problem. 1 in 200, 1 in 1,000 is a big problem, but this study's not big enough to see that.
Right.
And then it was only 5 days long. So no systemic problem really is going to be seen. That something that has to develop. You might get death, like from the, an allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, but you're not going to get all the things that hepatitis B, studies showing it could potentially lead to autism. That's going to take 2 or 3 years to be able to diagnose.
Right.
Multiple sclerosis, many studies have shown multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis. That's not going to happen inside of 5 days. And so they get away with saying, hey, our studies didn't see the multiple sclerosis that we did. Your study was 5 days long. This is the heart of what's going on. So when we talk about unethical, what they'll say is you can't do that prospective study, meaning you can't deny a placebo group access to a vaccine that exists. They compare it in a way, it's, if you know the Tuskegee experiment, this story that happened where African Americans in the South, I think was it 1960s, 50s? I forget exactly the dates on that, but they let a bunch of African Americans in the community have syphilis. I think some of them, they even gave them syphilis, but whatever the case, they already had antibiotics that would cure it, but they didn't give it to them because they wanted to study what it does to your body, how quickly it kills you. I mean, totally illegal. See, our own CDC did that. You use real people in the study and denied them access to the penicillin that would have saved their lives. That's what they say would happen in this type of study. That's how they use that comparison.
Right.
Well, you can't deny access to a measles vaccine. They could die of measles in the middle of the trial. That wouldn't be fair. They never did. They could have legally done that before the product ever existed. The first ever hepatitis B vaccine should have been tested against a placebo. The first ever polio vaccine should have been tested against a placebo, MMR, all of it. Never happened. Didn't happen then, so now it can happen. And it's really unfortunate, right, that medicine kind of giggles at us like, well, sorry, can't do it now. So we're stuck with no safety being established, and we're seeing a lot of sick kids. But you can ethically do a retrospective study, which is children that have already, or frankly, their parents have already made the choices that they've made. It's not a perfect study. It's not as randomized as you would like it. There's probably, some of the things they'll say is the unvaccinated parents do a lot more than not just vaccinate. And these are the confounding issues Henry Ford's concerned about. And I'm not going to say it's a decent argument, which is, if you think about it, if we're going to compare kids who are vaccinated to kids that were unvaccinated, are they living the exact same life? Only difference is they're not vaccinating. Because that's what you want in a study. You want a real comparison. So let me give you an example. For when you think about confounding issue, a good example would be there was early studies that showed that alcoholism caused cancer, right? They took all these people that, were admitted to be alcoholics, drank a certain amount of drinks every night, 5 to 10 drinks or whatever every single night, and they had higher rates of cancer. So that study on its own, you could say alcohol causes cancer. Right. But then someone goes, well, hold on a second. Do alcoholics do other things that could be causing cancer? And if you look at it, alcoholics tend to be more likely cigarette smokers. And then if you then parse out, get rid of all of the alcoholics that smoke cigarettes and only focus on the alcoholics that say, no, I don't smoke cigarettes, all of a sudden the cancer goes away. And so now you go, now let's do a study, take alcohol out of the equation, let's just look at cigarette smokers. Oh, boom.
There's your real cause.
There's what's causing the cancer.
Yeah.
So the same thing is there's something in the unvaccinated group that is making them healthier that might not have to do with them not vaccinating. And so if you look at that, your average person that's not vaccinating their kids, unless it's because their child's just really sickly. So you have to take that group out of the scenario, which Henry Ford did. They took the very sick, the kids who were born sick, and both the vaccinated and unvaccinated groups were taken out. Let's just deal with perfectly healthy kids. But unvaccinated parents are more likely to be using bottled water, not tap water. They're more likely to give their kids vitamins, more likely to eat organic food. more likely to not go through airport scanners and worried about x-rays and things like that, more likely to not let their kids use their cell phones as often, right? I mean, there's just a whole host of health decisions that your average person not vaccinating is thinking about that might not be the case of a vaccinating family that lets their kids eat more Doritos, they eat more McDonald's, there's a lot of things that they're doing. And so that's the argument Henry Ford makes. It's the argument the CDC is making, is that it'd be very hard to control for those confounding issues. But here's my problem. By that statement that we can't figure out how to do a comparative study because there's other confounding issues, what the CDC, and this is what they've been saying for decades now, what they're admitting is we know the unvaccinated are healthier. We just think could be other things other than vaccines, and we're not going to make an attempt to figure out what, but we are going to keep poisoning those kids. We're going to force them to vaccinate. We're going to force them to change their way of life. That's where I come in. That's why I'm here. They awoke, a Papa Bear here, really, because I wasn't vaccinated as a kid. It wasn't something I focused a lot on. My parents were like hippies. I didn't get vaccinated, and it worked for me. So I hadn't vaccinated my own baby in California right when SB 277, this law was written by Senator Richard Pan to force vaccinate every kid to go to school. I was, those of us that weren't vaccinated, we're like 3% of the population. Really super healthy kids, but I didn't make a big deal out of it. It was when they decided to say, you're not allowed to live that way, that this movement was ignited. It's always been there. There's always, since the very first smallpox vaccine in the 1800s or whatever, people have been rejecting it, and those that didn't like it. But the most recent, that pressure that came in California, that ignited a movement. And at that same exact moment, I made the film Vaxxed, which also, all of these things were a catalyst to create the medical freedom movement, which I think now is sort of even grown bigger in the MAHA movement. And so here we are asking very important questions. Why are the unvaccinated healthier? And if we know they're healthier, why aren't we celebrating that? Why are we trying to poison them? And why aren't we trying to get more people to live like that versus change the lifestyle of the kids that are the healthiest on this planet?
So I know inside my own house, I have one child who received vaccines and was injured at 18 months. We know that the shot that he got that caused it was DTaP. It was the only one that I allowed because I was already hesitant, and it didn't make sense to me to give a baby 12 different diseases at one time.
Right.
It doesn't make sense.
Never been studied. Never watched that happen before.
No, and you and I don't come in contact with 12 diseases on one day.
It'd be a really bad day.
Right.
For anybody. Right? And we're inflicting that bad day on purpose to every kid. It's crazy.
But inside of my house, I have two children, same parents. They've got the same genes, they've got the same house, the same diet. We have two totally different outcomes. We have one child who was vaccine injured and whose life was negatively impacted, and I have one child who's perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting study to do, in families like ours.
I think that is probably what makes me the most confident that I'm onto something, because I'm not a medical expert, I'm a journalist. But I've heard that story hundreds of times.
Right.
In fact, I'll take it a step further. Larger families will tell, and I have them in interviews, my first child has severe autism. They got the full vaccine schedule. They started having issues at 18 months, sort of like your child. Our doctor said it has nothing to do with vaccines, so we kept vaccinating them. Our second child came along, perfectly healthy. We're watching them this time, and then we started vaccinating them, and then watched them starting to dive off and lose attention and all these things. And we said, that's it. We're done. We're stopped. And then our third child, that child we didn't give any vaccines to. Our first child, severe autism, nonverbal, we're going to wear diapers their entire lives. Our second child, Asperger's, socially awkward, but was able to go to college, is doing pretty good. Looks like they might be able to live on their own. Our third child, no vaccine at all, valedictorian of the class, star of the football team, going on, can do anything they ever dreamed in their lives. And so when you watch that story, you just one step further than where you're at. But you're right, we should be studying everyone like that in this country. To me, those are the most compelling stories you have.
Yeah. And last night at the Brownstone dinner, I actually heard that from multiple families where they had multiple kids and they could see the different levels of damage, and then the one child who wasn't.
I have never met anyone that says we vaccinated our first child, they're autistic. We didn't vaccinate our second child, they're autistic too. Same level of autism. I'm not going to say, let me also be clear, I have met people that did not vaccinate their kid and they're autistic. So to be clear, it's not the cause of autism. I think it's one of the greater influences in the issue. But I've never met someone that said, full vaccine schedule, one kid autistic, none in our other autistic. I've never heard that. Probably exists somewhere on this earth, but I haven't heard that.
Yeah.
And the other story I hear all the time, almost in every family that goes through it.
Yeah, we hear that in our office frequently, and one of the cases that we just recently started working with, the kiddo was great until about the age of 10 and went in for a round of vaccines, and now is nonverbal, incontinent, in diapers, like.
That's the part of it that's hard, because there's people that will delay the schedule and they believe that, I'm at least going to spread them out. Good idea. I mean, if you're going to do this thing, definitely at least do that, I would say. But if you think somehow that's going to make it so that you have no risk whatsoever, be clear those stories exist all the time. I know families who had a child that was in a classroom and a fluorescent bulb fell in the class and broke on the floor next to their desk. And then the next day they wrote their child suddenly was not there, and repetitive motion disorders and things like that. Obviously some sort of mercury toxicity I think, but didn't happen from a vaccine, and they were already in school and learning. So things like that, I mean, I find it I'm fascinated by the investigation into this. And it's really one of the most disappointing things about modern medicine is that it really is choosing to stick its head in the sand. Whereas autism is one of the most fascinating explorations of what's going on in the human immune system. I think if you really look at the experts that have gone into it, and it's a very risky space to research, because if you decide to go anywhere outside of this is genetic and these kids were always going to be this way, your license is going to be at risk. They are not allowing pharma, who owns every AMA, all of these licensing bodies, they are in control of it. So when they see a doctor going, maybe this is environmental, you're flagged.
Right.
And now everything you're doing, any study you want to do, you could lose your license. But the opposite should have been true. Where is the curiosity? Where's the fascination in science? Like, what's really going on with these kids? Like, for instance, up in Minnesota, is it Minnesota or Wisconsin? I always get those two mixed up. But where they have the huge Somali population. It's Minnesota, right? Yeah, I think that's right. Anyway, huge Somali population that came over really in a short period of time and decided to land there. But as they were coming in, suddenly, this is I don't know, over a decade ago, they realized the highest autism rate in the world right now is in Minnesota in the Somalian population.
Okay.
And even amongst themselves, my understanding is they were trying to find witch doctors to what's going on with their babies. Like, they saw it as something, they didn't have a word for it. They didn't have this when they were in Africa, but now in America, their kids are all sick. Like, something's wrong with them. They thought they were possessed or something like that. Now, you would think when they're like, we have investigated this, we have researched this, if you really care about autism, suddenly you have a very powerful signal happening in one place. First of all, is there something in the water there?
Right.
Like, why is it these kids, why are they have the highest rates we've ever seen? Now, of course, I would say one thing we know happened, they all had to get all of their vaccines in order to come in this country. And then suddenly they have an issue, or they're vulnerable there. But you have a group that eats the same, has basically the same diet, has a lot of the same genetics. Normally, the Autism Institute of the CDC should have been built. Should have been a building right in the middle of the city there, saying we are going to research this group of people and see what's going on.
Right, that makes sense.
There was people that wanted to do simply polling. Let's poll, let's understand. CDC says we are not putting any funding towards that. Never really even looked into it. Just said, yeah, it's the highest rate, moving on. That's crazy. You know?
Doesn't make any sense if you're actually caring about the health and safety of our community.
And if you have any concern, what's doing it? I mean, it looks like something's doing it to these children. If there's a higher rate, then it's not constant. If it's not constant, then it's not genetic. So
if it was genetic, they would have come here with it. They
with
wouldn't
it.
have developed.
Right.
Because genes are only part of the picture. You know, genes
Exactly right.
just lay the foundation. It's really diet, environment, and toxins that pull the trigger.
And look, I think that there's already some research on MTHFR gene mutations, things like that. Is there a genetic component? Certainly there are children, I think when you look at it, that don't detoxify as quickly as others. So toxins in the environment are building up more and leading them to, have an inflammatory event that may make their brain swell. I mean, I think that's really as simple an explanation for what autism, appears to be, is a tragic event where something causes a brain swelling, encephalitis or encephalopathy, that when it subsides, when the swelling, it's just like getting hit in a car accident, or these military guys, you get a concussive event, your brain swells. Sometimes they should they have to crack your skull to make room for your brain to swell. But what if when we're vaccinating, the brain is swelling in our baby, it's causing brain damage because there's not enough room, the baby's screaming its head off, and then 3 days later, it's not speaking the same words that it was prior to the vaccination.
That was my son's exact story. He went in for the detox shot. He started screaming after the appointment, and at hour 73, he had a seizure. And when I called the pediatrician's office, I was told, well, it didn't happen within the first 72 hours. And I was like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Because he hadn't stopped crying for 3 days.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane to me.
It's I'm losing my ability to have empathy for the doctors, and I certainly have no respect. I've lost all appreciation and respect for pediatricians that will say vaccines don't cause autism. I was like, that's ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about. Science hasn't been done properly, and if you're going to keep ignoring this, then you're dangerous to humanity. And it's sort of the position I take now. And Robert Kennedy Jr. got into the HHS position. I have a bias on this. I wanted to know. I was director of communications for Bobby when he ran for president, so I'm close to him. I very much am ecstatic about the work that he's doing. But he cut, I think it was like nearly $600 million in funding to the genetic cause of autism. All of our funding's been going to the genetics and nothing in the environmental cause. And in all of the decades, I mean, we're talking, Vaxxed was about the last study ever done in America, funded by the government. That was done in late 1990, actually early 2004. So for 20 years, America has invested no money into any investigation of a toxin causing, or environmental toxin, only of genetics, which genetics could never explain the rise from 1 in 10,000 in the 1960s to 1 in 31 now.
And there's no specific, I work with genetics on a frequent basis inside of mental health. There is no specific gene for autism.
Right.
There's not one that we can point to. There is definitely, you've got the MTHFR that you brought up, and the COMT, MAO, DAO, all of those different pathways, but we can't even really say that we're doing genuine research in those areas because we're not testing babies when they're born to see what that looks like. So in my son's instance, we got into the Yale genetics department after his vaccine injury, and they pulled his genetic profile. This kid has more mutations than anyone I've ever read a report on. What they can't tell me is, did he have the mutations before the injury, or did they cause it?
Really important. There was a study, I forget where it was done, I probably shouldn't even, I'm like searching for so many parts of this story, but anyway, there's a study that was done looking, I was going to say Dr. Deisher, who is a stem cell expert who's looked into autism and issues like that, Teresa Deisher. She pointed out there was a study done by a university that took the stem cells from the umbilical cord of autistic children, and then, they developed autism later in life, and then they gave them their own stem cells that had been collected from the umbilical cord when they were born and stored, and it was helping reduce
That's amazing.
the autism. And Teresa Deisher told me, she's like, I called the university and said, you just proved that this is not genetic. And they're like, what do you mean? She's like, if autism is genetic, then those stem cells should have the genes in them
Yep.
that
And
causes
they would have just
autism,
kept
and it
on
would have
going.
had no value whatsoever to inject those into those kids. If it's curing them or helping them in any way, then it means that something has altered or changed their genetics, or changed their health.
Right.
So it's so many things like that. So many studies looking at the gut biome. I mean, really fecal transplant studies that are curing mice of autism, and we are seeing some help with children, that have autistic symptoms getting fecal transplants. What does the gut biome have to do with autism?
If it's a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's but to the gene thing, I want to say, because there's a huge, for those of us investigating this, and Bobby gets into some trouble by the neurodiverse group will say, oh, you hate autism, you hate autistic kids, you're trying to get rid of us because we're trying to find a cure. I want to say the opposite is really true. I would say it would be like we discovered this blindness was in Africa, and in third world nations were suffering from blindness issues in children. And they finally discovered that they weren't getting any vitamin A in their diet. And so they thought, how can we inject vitamin A? One of the interesting things was in certain countries, can we put in the salt? And they found that they used MSG more than they used salt. So they put vitamin A in MSG and got rid of the blindness. So does that mean you're anti-blind people? Because you found a cure to get rid of the issue. But I will say this, the reason the CDC and WHO or anyone involved were looking for the genetic cause of autism was not because they love autistic children and they love neurodiversity, it was so you could abort those kids so they never come into this world. That is what it's for. That's what their discovery of the gene for Down syndrome, like the issue of Down syndrome. Why do you think you don't really see Down syndrome anymore? It's because we abort those babies. At least if there are some religious groups that will have the baby no matter what, but the entire reason you're getting ultrasounds and doing these tests is, does my baby have a genetic abnormal, or in this case, a trisomal issue? I can abort them. The CDC wanted to be able to abort those kids. And so say, here's the genetic, your child has this much risk of potentially being autistic. Oh, great, abort them, let me try again. So this group of autistic people that are like, you're against us. Now the system that's trying to say that's genetic, they're actually coming after you. They don't want you to exist. We want you to be the best that you can be and as healthy as you can possibly be.
I want to thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
It was a great conversation. I always love talking to you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to give to parents or to our audience as a recommendation moving forward on how do we address this and make sure that our children are happy and healthy?
I think everyone at this point should, whether you believe in vaccines or you don't believe in vaccines, we all have the same problem. Our kids are the sickest we've ever seen. We've gone from 12.8% chronic disease in the 1980s when I was a kid to now 54% of our kids have chronic disease. 75% of the kids in America would not be able to pass the health exam to get into the military. So we have never seen anything like this. This is the greatest decline in human health that has ever been recorded. So let's get away from putting doctors on a pedestal on their watch. The CDC, FDA, all these regulatory agencies, they have overseen the greatest decline in human health that's ever recorded. It's probably a host of things. It's probably plastics, bisphenols and forever chemicals, and maybe fluoride in our water, and then pesticides and herbicides sprayed on our food. And I think you have to put vaccines in the mix. Dr. Peter McCullough just did a meta-analysis of hundreds of studies around the world and has come up with, I think it's like 10 different things that are contributing to autism, but the easiest one to fix is vaccinations. And I would just say this, we should stand up together on all sides of this conversation and ask for, if you believe in vaccines, then you should demand that the CDC, the FDA, NHS in England, every major health department in the world, do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study and get to the bottom of this. If someone can start showing us studies that show the vaccinated are actually healthier, so be it. So be it. But if all you're going to do is attack every study that does that comparison, oh, it has its flaws, it has its problems, then you're hiding something. Why can't you do that study and show us a different result? And I think that we should stand up now and say, prove to us that vaccines are making our kids healthier. This is not a conversation about infectious diseases. Like, oh, well, kids that aren't vaccinated get more measles. I want my kid to get the measles. I'm not afraid of it. I want chicken pox. I want my kids to have mumps, all of those things. I want them to have those things as kids because they're designed to have them. I believe what has happened is we've traded these trivial childhood illnesses that were not deadly before we had vaccines. We've traded those light infections as children for lifelong permanent illness, chronic disease. That's the trade-off we've made. Oh, well, you're not going to get the 5 days of the chicken pox on your skin. You're going to have psoriasis your entire life instead. What trade-off is that? Or worst case scenario, you're not going to have measles for 10 days. You're going to have autism your whole life. You're going to, be in the worst case scenario, not be able to speak and be in a diaper your whole life. What kind of trade-off is that? We've got to reassess this trade-off decision we've made because we didn't make this decision. The pharmaceutical industry did. It made it for us. And I thought, yesterday at the Brownstone event, Jeffrey Tucker, just a brilliant mind. I think he's writing an article about this week, but what he said was brilliant. That vaccines have never been a consumer product. This was never wanted by anyone. No one's ever walked in and said, hey, I want to vaccinate my kid, I'm going to buy all these vaccines. This has been forced upon us from the very moment it was created. It's been our pharmaceutical industry using the government to force these things on us. There is no market there naturally. No one really thinks that they want these things. They're doing it because they're being forced to. And we wouldn't be talking about this if we were healthy. If our kids were just thriving beings and the healthiest we'd ever seen, what argument do we have? But the opposite is true. Our kids are incredibly sick, and everyone. We shouldn't have sides. We should have compassion for each other. I just want to know the truth. Why are our kids so sick? And why is it the unvaccinated kids, as you look around, are not having these major health issues? So if you want to get to the bottom of that, start with aninconvenientstudy.com. You can watch the film for free.
It was an amazing documentary. I absolutely recommend that every single family watches it. So thank you again for being here. And for all of our viewers, please remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe.